Welcome back to Inside the Philippines Journals. If this is your first time here, this is the channel where we sit down with the men and women who left everything they knew behind and started again on the other side of the world. And we let them tell it straight, the good and the bad. No polish. The man you're going to hear from today is called Bas. He's 55. He's Dutch. And for most of his life he was a heavy equipment mechanic, the kind of man who fixes the machines that dig the roads and move the earth. Excavators, cranes, the big diesel plant that most people never think about until it stops. He spent 30-odd years with his hands inside those engines, and he built something of his own with them too. And then, in the space of about 2 years, most of it was gone. Not all of it his fault, not all of it anyone's fault, but gone. He came here at an age when a lot of men are counting down to a pension, except he didn't have one coming. He came with almost nothing, his tools, his hard head, and a number in the bank that would frighten most people who'd worked as long as he had. What he did with that, and how close he came to losing even that, is the whole reason we wanted to talk to him. Before we get into it, if you're watching, do us a favor and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are right now. We read them. If you've got your own story of starting over somewhere far from home, we want to hear it. And if these stories mean something to you, hit like and subscribe so the channel can keep finding the people who tell them. Bas is not a sentimental man, and he asked us not to make him sound like one, so we won't. Here's his story, in his own words. I have never been good at feeling sorry for myself, so I will try not to start now. I was born near Zwolle, in the east of the Netherlands, flat country, a lot of rain, a lot of quiet people. My father repaired tractors, and I grew up smelling diesel and thinking that was just what the world smelled like. By the time I was 20, I could strip a hydraulic pump and tell you what killed it by the pattern of the wear. That is not a talent you brag about at parties, but it feeds a man for his whole life, or it should. For 30 years, I worked on plant machinery, big stuff. The excavators and cranes that build the harbors and the roads. Good money, hard on the body, but honest. I have hands that do not fully close anymore, from the cold and the years, and a back that tells me the weather before the radio does. But I was good. That is not vanity. It is just true. When a machine was down and 3 men had failed to fix it, they called me, and usually I found it, because I did not guess. I listened, I measured, I followed the fault back to its cause. My father taught me that a machine never lies. Only people lie. The machine just tells you, honestly, exactly how it has been treated. And somewhere in my 40s, I did the thing every tradesman dreams about. I stopped working for other men, and I started a small plant hire and repair business of my own. 3 machines, then 5, a workshop, 1 apprentice, my name on the invoices. It was not an empire, but it was mine. And I had built it the way I build everything, slowly, checking my work. My wife used to say I checked things twice, even when there was nothing left to check. She was not entirely wrong. It is a good habit for machines. For a marriage, perhaps less so. But we will get to that. I will not bore you with the whole story of how it came apart, because honestly, even now it makes me tired. A partnership, a man I trusted. Willem, we had known each other 20 years, who brought in the contracts while I kept the machines running. That was the arrangement, and it worked, until it did not. He signed things he should not have signed. Personal guarantees on debts. Cross guarantees for a company of his I barely knew existed. My name entangled with his in ways I had never read carefully, because I trusted him, and because reading contracts was, I told myself, his half of the work. That was my great mistake, and I own it. Not that Willem was dishonest. I still do not know, truly, whether he was a crook or just a fool who drowned and grabbed my leg on the way down. It does not matter much now which it was. When it all came due, there was a lawsuit, and lawyers, and a court, and 2 years of my life spent in rooms explaining myself to people who had never held a wrench. I learned in those rooms that the law is a machine too, but a cruel one, that runs on money and does not much care about the truth of a thing, only what can be proven on paper. I had spent my life around honest machines. This one broke me in a way an engine never could. When it finished, the business was scrap. The workshop was sold. The house I had bought and mostly paid off, that went too into the settlement. I had once, on paper, been worth well into 6 figures. A man with property, a share of a company, something to show for the decades. What I walked out with, when the dust settled, was about 2.5 million pesos. Though, of course, I did not think in pesos then. I thought in euros, around 40,000 euros. That was it. 55 years old. No wife anymore. She had left somewhere in the middle of all that, and I do not entirely blame her. No house, no company, and a pension I could not touch for another 12 years, if it would even be worth anything by then. 40,000 euros and a set of tools. That was the sum of me. Now, a lot of men in that position drink. Some of them stayed in the same town and got smaller and smaller. I understand it. I felt the pull of it. But I am a mechanic, and a mechanic looks at a broken machine and does not weep over it. He asks, what is the root cause, and what can still be saved? And what is the cheapest reliable path to running again? So I sat at my sister's kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold, and I did the arithmetic on my own life. In the Netherlands, 40,000 euros at 55 is nothing. It is 2 years of rent, and then you are on the street. But I had spent enough time on job sites with men from everywhere to know that money weighs differently in different places. And I kept thinking about a trip I had taken years before to the Philippines, a fortnight, a colleague's wedding in Cebu. I remembered the heat and the noise, and that things there were being built everywhere, badly, by machines that were always breaking down. Machines that were always breaking down. In a country full of men who could drive them, but not many who could truly fix them. I remember, on that trip years before, standing at the edge of a building site in Cebu in the heat, watching a backhoe sit dead in the mud, while 6 men stood around it arguing, and none of them opening the engine cover. I remember thinking, without any plan behind the thought, just as an observation, in the Netherlands, that machine is running again in an hour. Here it has been dead for 3 days, and will be dead for 3 more. I filed it away, the way you file away a strange noise in an engine you are not working on yet. And now, at my sister's table, the noise came back to me. That is not a holiday, I thought. That is a workshop waiting for a mechanic. I did not go there to find a woman. I want to be clear about that, because I know the stories this channel tells. I went there to work. I was too old and too burned to be chasing romance. What I was chasing was much simpler. I wanted to fix things again, and I wanted to earn my own bread. And I wanted to do it somewhere the 40,000 euros could actually become a life instead of just delaying the funeral. That was the whole plan. It was not a good plan yet, but it was a starting point. And a starting point, for a man who has just watched everything he built get sold at auction, is not nothing. I landed in Cebu in the wet season, and the heat hit me like opening the door of a running engine. I am a big, pale Dutchman. Within 20 minutes, my shirt was stuck to me, and it stayed that way, more or less, for the next 3 years. The airport, the traffic, the wall of sound, jeepneys, horns, a man selling something out of a bucket, music from somewhere. In the Netherlands, silence is the default, and noise is the interruption. Here it is the other way around, and it took me months to stop flinching at it. I did not stay in Cebu City. Too big, too expensive, too many people already doing everything. I took a bus and then a boat, and I ended up in Dumaguete, on the island of Negros, because a man I'd met online, an Australian, retired, been there 15 years, told me it was small enough to know people and busy enough to have work. Sugar cane country, construction going up, boats and generators and trucks and mills, all of it running in that heat, all of it wearing out faster than anyone maintained it. I rented a room first, not an apartment, a room in a concrete house belonging to a widow named Nanay Ising for 5,000 pesos a month, about 80 euros. It had a fan, a bed, a window that did not quite close, and a rooster next door that started at 4 in the morning and considered the job important. There was a mercury drug 2 streets away, a wet market where I could not read a single sign, and a basketball court on the corner where boys played until midnight under one buzzing light. The whole street ate together, more or less, plastic chairs pulled out onto the concrete in the evening, and the smell was always the same. Charcoal, and something frying, and the sweet rot of the drainage, and the diesel. Especially the diesel. I found that smell almost comforting. It is the one thing that smelled like home. I could have afforded better. I did not take better. I had 40,000 euros and no income, and a man in that position does not spend on comfort. He spends on the machine that will earn. My sister, when I told her the plan on the phone, was quiet for a long time and then said, "Bas, you are 55. As if I did not know. As if 55 were a sentence rather than a number. I told her that a man of 55 who fixes engines is worth more than a man of 30 who cannot, and that the machines here did not know my age. She did not laugh, but she stopped arguing, which in my family is the same as a blessing. The first few weeks I mostly walked and watched. This is a thing my father taught me. Before you touch a broken engine, you listen to it run. So I listened to the town. I found where the tricycle drivers got their machines fixed, which was badly. I found the little welding shops with their sparks flying onto the street. I drank instant coffee at the sari-sari stores and let people get used to the sight of me. The big Kano who was always looking at engines. I also learned the shape of the days. How the heat breaks around 4 in the afternoon and the whole town comes back outside. How Sunday belongs entirely to the church, the bells, and then the singing spilling out of every open door, and how sincere it was, not performance, people who actually believed. How a tricycle across town costs a few pesos, and how the driver will wait an hour for you without complaint if you ask him nicely, and he decides he likes you. How nothing runs on time, and everything runs on relationship, on who knows whom, on whether you have been kind. For a Dutchman raised on the clock and the appointment, this was a foreign engine indeed. But I did not fight it. You do not fix a diesel by insisting it should run on petrol. I also found the expat bar. There is always an expat bar. This one was near the boulevard, run by an Englishman, and every afternoon the same 6 or 7 Western men sat there, with their San Miguels going warm, and they told each other the same stories. About the girlfriend who bled them dry, about the business the partners stole, about how you cannot trust anyone here, how they are all after your money, how the whole country is a trap for men like them. One of them had been there, on that same stool more or less, for 11 years. 11 years of the same beer and the same complaint. He had come to paradise and built himself a small prison out of his own bitterness and never once thought to leave it. I listened to that too, the way I listen to everything. And I noticed something. These men were not warning me. They were confessing. Every story of being cheated had, underneath it, a decision the man himself had made. Money handed over fast, papers not read, a woman half his age he chose to believe, a business he never understood put entirely in someone else's hands. They blamed the country. But the root cause, in almost every case, was sitting on the bar stool telling the story. I decided two things at that bar, though I did not say them out loud. First, that I would take these men seriously as a warning, because a smart man learns from other men's wrecks. And second, that I would not become one of them. I would not put my money anywhere I could not see it. I would not sign anything I did not understand. And I would not, under any circumstances, hand control of the thing that fed me to a person just because they smiled at me. One of them, a heavy American, put his hand on my shoulder and told me, "Don't start a business here, mate. They'll take it right out from under you. Foreigner can't even own it." He meant it as despair. I took it as data, because he was right about the law. I would learn that soon enough. A foreigner cannot simply own a business here, cannot own land at all. But being told a machine is difficult to fix has never once made me want to walk away from it. It makes me want to understand exactly how it works. That is the whole difference, I think, between the men at that bar and me. Not that I was smarter, that I was curious instead of frightened. I want to be fair to those men, though, because it is easy to sit here now and be hard on them. Most of them were not fools. They were lonely, and they had come a very long way on a dream. And when the dream broke, they had nowhere to put the anger except onto the country and its people. I understood that pull. I had my own anger from the Netherlands, from Willem and the lawyers. A cold, hard knot of it I carried across the world in my chest. The difference, I think, was only that I had somewhere to put mine. I could put it into work, into a machine, into the long, patient business of building something with my hands. A man with a trade is lucky that way. His anger has a job to do. Give a lonely man a purpose, and he does not rot on a bar stool. Take it away, and he does. I finished my one beer, I only ever had one, and I walked home in the dark, past the roosters and the karaoke, past the sari-sari stores still lit and selling single cigarettes and sachets of shampoo. And I thought, all right, now I understand the machine a little better. Now, let us see if it can be made to run. The first thing I had to understand was the law, because I am not a man who builds on ground he has not surveyed. Here is the reality, and if you take one thing from an old Dutchman today, take this. In the Philippines, a foreigner cannot own land. Not a little. Not through a clever trick. Not in her name, but really yours. That is not ownership. That is a gift you are pretending is a loan. And the graveyard of expats is full of men who learned the difference. A foreigner also cannot fully own most kinds of business here. For the kind of small workshop I wanted, the law wants majority Filipino ownership. 60-40 in the ordinary case. That frightens most men. It is why the American at the bar had given up before he started. But I had spent my whole life reading the manual before turning the key, and when I actually read this one, it was not the trap everyone said. It was a structure, and structures I can work with. The question was not, how do I get around the law? The question was, how do I build something real inside the law, with a partner who is genuinely a partner and not a landlord over my own work? Which meant everything came down to the partner. And I was in no hurry to choose one. I did not want an investor. I did not want a silent name on a paper who owned the majority and could one day change the locks. I wanted a working partner, someone Filipino, someone who could hold the ownership and the permits the law required, but who was in the shed with me, hands dirty, with as much of his own life in it as I had of mine. Equal in every way that mattered, even if the paper had to say 60-40, because a paper is only as strong as the man it is written about. While I looked, I worked. Quietly, informally, out of a rented lean-to behind a hardware store, 2,500 pesos a month, 40 euros. Word gets around fast in a small town when the Kano can actually fix things. A tricycle engine that 3 shops had given up on, I found a scored cylinder, honed it, and it ran. A rice trader's generator that everyone said was dead. A fuel injection fault, 2 days, back to life. I did not charge much. I was not building income yet. I was building reputation, which, in a place that runs on trust, is the only capital that matters. There is a thing that happened in those first months that told me I had chosen the right country for my particular trade. A man brought me a water pump, a Japanese diesel, that had been repaired 4 times by 4 different shops. Each shop had swapped a part, guessed, and sent it back still broken. I sat with it for an afternoon, the way my father would have, and the fault was almost insulting in its simplicity. A worn Woodruff key, a few pesos of metal, letting the timing slip under load. Nobody had looked. They had all replaced expensive things and never looked at the cheap thing that was actually wrong. When I handed it back running, the man looked at me as if I had performed a small miracle. And I understood then that my edge here was not that I was cheaper, or younger, or stronger. It was patience. In a place where everyone was in a hurry to guess, the man who slowed down and actually diagnosed was worth his weight. And I was learning the culture the way you learn a new engine, by paying attention to what it actually does, not what the manual says it should. I learned about utang na loob, the debt of gratitude, how a favor creates a bond that can be beautiful or can be a leash, depending. I learned that people here will avoid telling you bad news to your face, that a problem will be smiled over rather than spoken, and that if you want the truth, you must make it safe and easy for a man to give it to you. For a blunt Dutchman, this was like learning to work left-handed, but a good mechanic adapts to the machine in front of him. He does not demand the machine become German. It was in those months I met the 2 men who would decide how this all went, and they could not have been more different. The first was Junel. He was maybe 40, a welder and small engine man, quiet, missing the top of one finger from a job years back. He ran a struggling little repair shop that was struggling mostly because he undercharged and over-delivered, which is a disease of honest men. I brought him a job I could not do alone, a cracked excavator housing that needed proper welding, and I watched how he worked. Careful, slow. He cleaned the metal 3 times before he struck an arc. When a job went wrong on his own dime, he ate the cost without a word and did it again right. I trusted his hands before I trusted his words, which is the correct order. Junel had a wife and 3 children, and a mother he supported, and he never once used them to ask me for anything. That mattered to me more than he knew. I had read enough and heard enough at the bar to be wary of the family that arrives with the man, the endless needs, the emergencies, the way an obligation can be turned into a tap that never quite shuts off. But Junel kept his family and his work in separate rooms, and when I once offered, unprompted, to help with a hospital bill for his mother, he refused, and paid it himself in installments over half a year. A man who will not take money he has not earned, even when it is offered freely, is a man you can build something with. The second was Ray. Ray found me, not the other way around. Younger, sharp shirt, good English, a phone always ringing. He had heard about the Dutchman who fixed heavy equipment, and he came with a vision already fully formed. Not a workshop. A yard. Rental equipment, a fleet, contracts with the sugar mills, big money, boss, the biggest. He talked fast, and he talked well, and I will admit that a part of me, the impatient part, the part that had lost a business and wanted one back quickly, leaned toward him. He bought the beers. He knew everyone, or said he did. He had that quality certain men have, of making you feel that the door to a better room was standing open, and only you were foolish enough to hesitate at it. I have met that quality before. Willem had it too, now that I think of it. That should have been my first measurement. It was not. Not yet. 2 partners. One who cleaned the metal 3 times. One who never stopped talking about how rich we would be. I did not know yet which one I would choose, but I knew which one my gut and 30 years of diagnosing failures was quietly whispering about. I just was not ready yet to listen. I want to tell you about how I actually built it, because the building is the whole point, and the building is boring, and boring is exactly why it worked. I chose Junelle, not in a dramatic moment. There was no dramatic moment. I simply spent more time with both men, and the more time I spent, the clearer the wear pattern became. So we did it properly, Junelle and I. And properly is a word I want you to hear. We registered a real business. Not a handshake, not, we'll sort the papers later. We went to the DTI and registered the name. We got the mayor's permit and the barangay clearance, the BIR registration for tax. Yes, tax. A foreigner who wants to sleep at night pays his tax here. The ownership was structured the way the law requires, with Junelle holding the Filipino majority, because that is the law, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. But, and this is the part the men at the bar never do, we wrote everything down. A real partnership agreement, drawn by an actual lawyer in Dumaguete, not a friend, a lawyer I paid. What each of us put in. What each of us owned of the profit. What happened if one of us wanted out, or died, or wanted to bring in his cousin. Every ugly possibility, written down while we still liked each other. Because contracts are not for when things go well. Contracts are the maintenance schedule for when they go badly. I know that some of you are hearing 60-40, the Filipino holds the majority, and feeling your stomach tighten, because it sounds exactly like the arrangement in every horror story ever told at that bar. And you are right to feel it. That structure has ruined many foreigners. But listen carefully to the difference, because the difference is everything. Those men handed majority ownership to someone, and then handed over control as well. The money, the bank account, the decisions, the keys, and then were shocked when the person who legally owned the thing behaved as if they owned it. I did not do that. Junelle held the legal majority as the law requires. But the agreement we wrote governed the money, the roles, the profit split, the exit, all of it, in black ink. The bank account needed both our signatures. Neither of us could sell or borrow against the business alone. I was not relying on Junelle's goodness to protect me, though he had plenty of it. I was relying on a document that would protect me even on the day, God forbid, that his goodness ran out. That is the whole trick. You do not find a person so trustworthy, you need no contract. You find a good person, and then you write the contract anyway, precisely because they are worth keeping. That legal setup, the lawyer, the permits, the registrations, that cost me around 80,000 pesos, about 1,300 euros. The men at the bar would call that money thrown away. I call it the cheapest insurance I have ever bought. Then, the equipment. I did not buy new. I never buy new. I bought a second-hand Mitsubishi L300 van, tired but honest, for 220,000 pesos, around 3,500 euros. And I rebuilt half of it myself in the first month. A proper welding rig, a diesel generator, an air compressor, and the good tools I could not bring from home. Another 300,000 pesos, close to 5,000 euros. We rented a real lot then, with a roofed shed, on the edge of town near the road the sugar trucks used. Deposit and the first months, about 120,000 pesos, near 2,000 euros. Signage, spares, the first stock of consumables, another 180,000 or so. Now let me stop and show you my thinking, because this is the real lesson. I had arrived with about 2.5 million pesos, and the very first decision I made, before I spent 1 peso on the business, was to take 800,000 of it, around 13,000 euros, and put it away in a separate account, and pretend, absolutely and religiously, that it did not exist. That was my reserve. Not for the business, not for a good opportunity, not for an emergency in the business. For me. For the day it all went wrong, so that when it did, I would still have a plane ticket and 6 months to think, and would never, ever be the broken man at the bar with nothing left. A machine without a reserve of oil pressure destroys itself the first time it's stressed. So does a man. Everything I built out of what was left. And I lived, myself, on almost nothing while I built it. 28,000 pesos a month, about 450 euros, and that included Nane Icing's rent, which I never upgraded even when I could have. I ate where the tricycle drivers ate. I drank 1 beer sometimes. I did not send myself on holidays, or buy a big motorbike to impress anyone. Every peso the shop earned in that first year went back into the shop, or into the reserve, or into the small, careful life, and nowhere else. And the shop, slowly, began to run. Junel's welding and my diagnostics turned out to be a good pairing. He could fix the metal. I could find the fault. The sugar mills near Bays started sending us work when their own people were overwhelmed. A construction outfit putting up a building on the boulevard hired us to keep their equipment alive. It was not big money. Some months we barely cleared 30,000 pesos of actual profit between the two of us. But it was real, and it was growing, and it was clean. I will tell you what those first months actually felt like, because the number 30,000 pesos profit hides the truth of it. They felt like drowning slowly in a warm bath. Long days in that shed, the roof so hot by noon you could not touch the underside of it, sweat running into my eyes while I traced a fault by feel. Nights doing the books by the light of my phone because I would not run the fan and the light both. The slow, grinding fear, every single week, that this was the week no one would come. That I had taken my 40,000 euros and my one last chance and buried them in a shed in a town no one back home could find on a map. There were nights I lay under that fan and did the arithmetic of failure. How many months I could survive, how much the plane ticket home would cost, what I would tell my sister. I did that arithmetic often, but I want you to notice, I could only do it calmly because the reserve was there. A man doing the arithmetic of failure with a reserve behind him is anxious. A man doing it without one is desperate, and desperate men make the decisions that finish them. Ray, meanwhile, had not gone away. He came around the shed now and then, looked at what we were doing with a kind of pity, and told me I was thinking too small. His yard was almost ready, he said. The mill contract was almost signed. He just needed partners to come in now before it got expensive. 600,000 pesos, he said, and I would own a piece of something 10 times bigger than this shed. 600,000 pesos. Nearly 10,000 euros. A quarter of everything I had. And God help me. Some nights, sweating under that fan, listening to the rooster, I thought about it. Here is the thing about a slow, honest business. It is slow. And a man who has lost everything once is not a patient man about getting it back, no matter how calm he looks from the outside. So I did think about Ray's offer. Seriously. For maybe 2 weeks I let myself imagine it. The yard, the fleet, being a man of substance again, instead of a sweaty foreigner sharing a shed with a welder. Ray was clever. He never pushed too hard. He would just leave a little more information each time. A photo of the land, a name of a mill manager, a mention of another foreigner, a German, who had already come in and was very happy. But I am a mechanic, and when a machine's owner tells you it runs perfectly and the numbers on the gauge say otherwise, you do not argue with the owner. You trust the gauge. You find the fault. So without ever telling Ray I was doing it, I started to diagnose his beautiful machine the same way I would diagnose a failing engine. One system at a time. Root cause. The first thing that did not reconcile was the money. Ray talked about the yard being almost ready, but every time I asked a plain question, how much rent, paid to whom, for how long, the answer moved. 1 week, the land was leased. The next week, it was controlled by family. The next week, there was a title being processed. In my trade, when the story of what is wrong keeps changing, it means the man does not actually know what is wrong, or he does not want you to. Either way, you stop trusting the diagnosis. So I went and looked at the land myself. Just drove the L300 out there one afternoon, quietly, telling no one. This is a habit worth more than gold, and almost no one practices it. When a man tells you the thing exists, go and put your own hand on the thing. Not his photo of it, not his cousin's word for it. The thing itself. It was real land. That part was true. A wide, flat lot off the national road. Cane on 3 sides. But the people living on the edge of it, when I got out and talked to them in my broken Bisaya, and a lot of pointing, had never heard of Ray. They knew the family that owned it, and the family, it turned out later, had no idea their land was being offered to foreigners as a done deal. That is a very different machine than the one Ray was selling. I drove home slowly, and I did not feel clever or triumphant. I felt a little sick, honestly, the way you feel when you open an engine you were told is healthy and find the inside full of metal shavings, because I had wanted it to be true. That is the part one want you to hear. I wanted Ray to be real. Then the mill contract. Ray had dropped a manager's name. I knew, by then, a man who worked at that mill. A real customer of ours. A diesel foreman we'd done good work for. I asked him, casually, over a Coke, whether the mill was signing a big equipment rental deal. He laughed. There was no such deal. There was no such plan. The name Ray had used was a real man, but that man had never met Ray. And the happy German. I asked around. Foreigners in a small town all eventually cross paths. It took a month, but I found him, not happy at all. He had put in money, 300,000 pesos, on the same almost ready yard. 8 months earlier. He had seen almost nothing since. When he pushed, the stories shifted. Exactly the way they shifted with me. He was too ashamed to warn anyone. He just wanted his money back and knew, in his gut, he would never see it. No single one of these things was proof. That is the thing people misunderstand about how you catch a bad situation. You are almost never handed one clean piece of evidence, one phone you find, one lie you catch. It is an accumulation, a number that does not reconcile, a story that shifts, a reference that does not check out, a gut feeling you talk yourself out of, and then the same gut feeling again and again, until the weight of all the small wrong things becomes heavier than your wish for it to be right. This is exactly how you diagnose an intermittent fault, the worst kind of fault there is, a machine that fails only sometimes, that runs perfectly the moment the mechanic is watching. You cannot fix it by waiting for the one big obvious breakdown, because it may never come while you are looking. You fix it by writing down every small symptom, every hesitation, every strange reading, and refusing to explain any of them away until the pattern draws itself. Ray was an intermittent fault. Every single meeting, taken alone, was fine, charming, plausible, a good reason for every delay. It was only when I stopped judging the meetings one at a time and laid them all on the bench together that the pattern was undeniable. The man was not building a yard. He was building a story and selling shares in it. And the story would run exactly as long as new money kept the engine turning, and not 1 hour longer. I did not confront Ray. There was nothing to gain from it. I simply became busy, and then more busy, and I stopped returning his messages with any warmth, and I never, ever gave him a single peso of the 600,000. The only thing it cost me was 20,000 pesos, about 300 euros. I had advanced him early on for a survey fee in a weaker moment before my head cleared. I wrote it off and considered it the cheapest tuition I ever paid. 300 euros to learn a man's true character, when the same lesson had cost the German 300,000 pesos, and would cost him more. I walked back to my shed, and to Junelle, who had never once promised me I'd be rich, and I looked at our modest, boring, real little business. And I felt something I had not felt since before the lawsuit. Not excitement. Relief. The specific relief of a man who has just backed slowly away from a machine that was about to take his hand off. I would like to tell you, it was smooth after that. It was not. The near miss with Ray was the danger I saw coming. The trouble that nearly sank me was the ordinary kind, the kind nobody makes a video about, and it very nearly did what Ray could not. It was our biggest job. A construction contractor, the one from the boulevard, had a major piece of equipment go down, a wheeled excavator, a real machine, and they needed it back fast because idle equipment on a job site bleeds money by the hour. It was a big repair for us. Parts we had to source from Cebu, long days, Junelle and me, and 2 hired hands working in the heat until we could not see straight. We did it right. We did it well. The machine ran better than it had in years. The bill, with parts and labor, came to about 150,000 pesos, around 2,400 euros. For a shop our size, that was enormous. That was 2 good months, and the contractor would not pay. Not could not, would not, or perhaps could not. With these things you often cannot tell, and it does not much change what it does to your bank account. The project had run into its own money trouble, and when that happens, the small suppliers at the bottom are the ones who get told to wait. First, it was next week. Then it was a manager who was not around. Then it was the smiling and the not answering that I had by now learned to read like a warning light. Saving face, avoiding the confrontation, the problem left to fester rather than spoken. My money, my parts, my 2 months of work, sitting inside a machine now happily running on another man's job site, earning that man money by the hour while I could not pay my own supplier. I understand now that this is simply the water an expat businessman swims in here, and it is not malice most of the time. It is the whole chain being short of cash, and the pain rolling downhill until it reaches the smallest man, who was me. But understanding a thing intellectually does not pay your welder's wages at the end of the month. Junel came to me one evening, quiet, turning his cap in his hands, and did not ask for his share. He would never ask, but I could see it in him, the worry for his own family, and that was worse than if he had shouted at me. I had brought him into this. I had told him we would do it properly and slowly and it would be safe. And here we were. And here is where the reserve, my sacred, untouchable 800,000 pesos, started whispering to me. Because 150,000 pesos we were owed and not paid meant we could not pay our own parts supplier in Cebu, and could not buy the consumables for the next jobs, and Junel had a family, and the 2 hired men needed their wages, and the whole modest machine of the business was suddenly grinding because one bearing had seized. It would have been so easy. Just borrow from the reserve. Just this once. Just to bridge it. I want to be honest that I sat with that temptation for 3 days. The impatient man, the one who almost gave Ray his money, he was back, and he was reasonable, and he was wrong. Because I had learned this lesson already, at 55, the hard way, in a courtroom in the Netherlands, the moment you fund a broken situation out of your own protected reserve, you have not solved the problem. You have only moved the problem into the one account that was supposed to save your life. So I did not touch it. Instead, I did what a mechanic does. I stopped panicking about the whole machine, and I found the actual fault, which was not, "We have no money." The fault was one specific man owed us one specific amount, and was avoiding one specific conversation. So I made it safe and easy for him to pay. I did not shout. I did not threaten. I went to the site myself, in person, again and again, calm, patient, a large Dutchman who was simply, pleasantly, always there. I let him keep his face. I offered a schedule. Pay us half now, half in 30 days, and we call it settled and part as friends. One gave him a way to say yes without losing dignity, which in this country is often the whole key that the angry expats never find. It took 6 weeks. We got the half, then most of the rest. We ate a small loss on the tail of it, maybe 15,000 pesos, and I let it go. Chasing the last of it would have cost more in time and bad blood than the money was worth. And a good mechanic knows when a part is not worth saving. Meanwhile, I cut everything to the bone. My own 28,000 a month became 20. I delayed my own drawings before I ever delayed Junel's or the men's, and we crawled through the crunch on the shop's own thin blood, and not 1 peso of the reserve. It was ugly. There was a month I ate rice and dried fish, and told myself it was a diet. I remember standing in the Robinsons in town one afternoon, in the cold of the air conditioning just to escape the heat for free, looking at a shirt I wanted and did not buy, feeling every one of my 55 years and thinking, this is what doing it right actually looks like. Not the beach, not the drink at noon, a grown man not buying a shirt so that another man's children eat. Nobody makes that video, but that is the video. That is the whole thing. And the reserve, when we came out the other side, was still exactly 800,000 pesos, untouched, sacred, whole. I cannot tell you what that did for me on the inside. Every single day of that crunch, I knew I had the money to end the pain in one afternoon. and every single day I chose not to, because I understood that the pain was temporary, and the reserve was the thing that made me a free man instead of a trapped one. To have the cure in your pocket and refuse to take it, because you know it is not a cure, but a poison, that is discipline. And discipline is the only thing that separated me from the men at the bar. They were not stupider than me. They were only less disciplined at the one moment it counted. And around then, the last piece of the Ray business landed, almost like a full stop. Word went round the small foreign community that Ray's yard had collapsed entirely. There had never been a real contract, never a clear title. 2 more foreigners besides the German had put money in, an Australian and a Canadian, and it was all gone, chasing a story that shifted every time you grabbed it. I heard the numbers. Between them, the 3 of them had lost the better part of 4 million pesos. I sat in my shed with a warm San Miguel and did that arithmetic slowly. 4 million pesos, gone, from men who wanted to get rich fast, and 300 euros, gone, from the man who had checked the gauges and walked away. That was the whole ledger of the difference. Not luck, not being clever, just refusing, over and over, in the face of my own impatience, to hand my money to a machine I had not personally inspected. So, where does an old Dutchman end up after all that? I am still here. It has been a few years now. The shop with Junelle is not big, and it will never make me rich, and I have made my peace with that word. Never. In a good month, after everything, after the parts, the men's wages, the rent, the tax, Junelle's fair share and mine, I clear somewhere between 40 and 60,000 pesos for myself. Call it 700 to nearly 1,000 euros a month. In the Netherlands, that is nothing. Here, in Dumaguete, living the way I live, it is a life. A real one. I pay my own way. I owe no one. I built it with my hands, inside the law, and no one can change the locks on me because it is written down, every ugly possibility, in a lawyer's drawer. The reserve is still there. 800,000 pesos, 13,000 euros, that I have still never touched, and God willing, never will. I sleep well because of it. A man with a reserve is a different animal from a man without one. He can say no. He can walk away from the ray of the moment. He can wait 6 weeks for a bad debt instead of panicking into a worse decision. That reserve did not just protect my money. It protected my judgment, which is worth far more. Junelle and I are still partners, and that too has held, which after Willem I did not take for granted. We took on an apprentice last year, a serious boy of 19 who reminds me a little of myself, and I am teaching him to diagnose instead of guess, which is the only thing of value I have to leave behind. The sugar mills know our name now. When something big and expensive is down, and their own men have given up, they call the Dutchman and the welder, and usually we find it, because we do not guess. My father would understand this life completely, I think. He would not understand the heat, or the rice, or the roosters, but the workshop, the honest bill, the machine running again that was dead an hour ago, that he would understand, and I think he would be, in his undemonstrative way, not ashamed of me. After the courtroom, that means more to me than I can properly say. I want to be honest about the caveats, because this channel is not for fairy tales, and I did not agree to tell one. I am 55, and my body has 30 years of diesel and cold mornings in it, and I feel every one of them in this heat. I have no pension yet, and the one that eventually comes will be small. If my health goes badly, the arithmetic changes fast. Healthcare here is cash, and cash is exactly what I do not have in abundance. I am not a wealthy expat with a beachfront condo. I am a working man who happens to work in the tropics. Some nights the loneliness of it is real. I did not build a family here, only a life, and those are not the same thing. And there is one more caveat I owe you, the one it took me longest to admit. I did this right, but right is not the same as safe. There is no safe. A typhoon could flatten that shed next season. Junelle could fall ill. I could. The sugar could fail. The contractors could dry up. My hands could finally stop closing altogether. I have built a good small machine, but every machine wears, and a man of 55 with no pension and a modest reserve is not a man who has won. He is a man who is running well for now, and who knows it. I make my peace with that each morning. It is, I think, a more honest peace than pretending I have arrived somewhere final. There is no final. There is only the machine running today, maintained, watched, and a little oil pressure held in reserve for the day it is stressed. But I did not come here to be happy in the way the brochures mean. I came here to be free, and to be useful, and to earn my own bread, and those three things I have. I quit the rat race, yes, but not the way the influencers say it, sipping a drink at noon. I quit one race, and I entered a smaller, slower, more honest one, and this time I set the rules, and this time no partner can sign my life away behind my back. If you take anything from a blunt old mechanic, take these few things, because they are the whole engine. Keep a reserve you will never spend, and mean it. Do not buy land you cannot own. Do not pretend a gift is ownership. Build inside the law with a partner who is genuinely equal, and write down every ugly thing while you still like each other. Live smaller than you can afford until the thing you built can carry you. And when your gut keeps whispering about a man, do not argue with the gauge. Go and check every claim yourself, one at a time, and be willing to walk away from the beautiful fast thing, even when part of you is dying to believe it. I lost almost everything at 54. At 55, I started again with the scraps. And I did not get rich. And I did not get ruined. I got a small, good life that I understand completely, part by part, the way one understands an engine. For me, that is enough. It might even be the whole point. That's where we'll leave Bas. Not on a beach, not with a fortune, but in a workshop on the edge of a sugar town, owing nothing to anyone, with a reserve he's never touched, and a life he built with his own hands. We tell a lot of hard stories on this channel, and plenty of them end in loss. This one didn't, and it's worth being clear about why. Bas wasn't luckier than the men who lost everything. He was slower. He read the papers. He kept money he refused to spend. He checked what he was told instead of believing what he wanted to. There's no villain in his story. Even Ray is really just a warning about what happens when hope moves faster than diligence. The country didn't save him, and it didn't sink him. His own patience did the work. Both ways. If Bas's story meant something to you, let him know in the comments, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. If you've started over somewhere far from home or you're thinking about it, we'd genuinely like to hear where you are in that. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care of yourselves out there. This has been Inside the Philippines Journals.